2024 was an extremely difficult year for me, but also an incredibly amazing year, from starting a business to becoming a father and overcoming a deep personal struggle with jealousy. So the new year has started. I figured it's a great time to reflect and talk about my greatest lessons the greatest lessons that I've learned from 2024 as a way to reflect on the new year and can hopefully pass on to you guys in some way. And I just want to say that, first of all, this is one of my favorite things to talk about with what I learned in business this year. For those of you that don't know, I started a business, being my very own private practice, the Men's Therapy Studio, and it has been an incredible journey. It was painful at times and awesome, and overall, I love it. I love doing what I do. I help young individuals live their best life and figure things out. It's such meaningful work. Men's Therapy Studio, you can check it out. Link will be in the description, of course. So this year, starting the Men's Therapy Studio, it's been a real struggle, and I hope to make dedicated video on exactly what you need to do to start a private practice. But the thing that I learned most with regards to business in my first year is that everything, literally everything, is marketing. And what I mean by that is, you could be the best therapist in the world, but if people don't know that, then they will not see you. You will not get any clients. You could literally be the most trained, qualified, experienced therapist in the entire planet, but if you are not advertising yourself, if people do not know about you, then you will not have any clients. And it's an unfortunate reality. On the other hand, you could literally be the worst therapist in the world, but if people think you're an amazing therapist, you can get clients privately paying you even $1,000 a session. And I've met a therapist that does that, and it blows my mind. It blows my mind. And this person is packed. He's full. So it very much boils down to marketing. And often being an experienced therapist goes hand in hand with good marketing, because you're just selling the skills that you have. But that's the number one thing that I learned. So much of everything is about image. And I think it's true not just in business. It's true in politics. It's true in dating. It's true in romance. It's more about the image that you're able to sell. Some of you may be watching this and thinking like, oh, that's kind of deceitful in a way. And in a sense, like, I actually do agree with that. I think it's kind of weird that we live in a society or in a world where it doesn't actually matter what the truth is. Perception is much more important than truth, right? And if you control that perception, that's power. I remember when I was like 20, I had this obsession with this clothing company called Charles Tyrwhitt. I just loved their clothes, and actually the sweater is from them. But I love Charles Tyrwhitt clothes. I love getting their magazines and watching those cool models just like hanging out, smoking a cigar or a pipe, and just like doing classy things. I remember having a conversation with somebody else, and they were like, it's so deceitful because they can get the same exact shirt from Kirkland. Kirkland is Costco's brand. So at the time, Costco had very similar shirts to Charles Tyrwhitt. You know, my friend was just like, oh, it's so deceitful. I could get this shirt for $20, and on Charles Tyrwhitt, they sell for 50. And I said, like, yeah, but you know what? Even if it's the same exact shirt, I like the feeling of putting on that Charles Tyrwhitt shirt. It gives me that association with like those classy models. And so that's what it is. There is a certain lie to the hype. Like, the hype ultimately isn't true, but what you buy ultimately is that feeling, is that hype, right? And this is also even true for therapy in and of itself. I know people that will literally be like, okay, my life is a wreck. And then once they start going to therapy, even booking their first session, they feel better because they have the perception of, okay, things are going to be okay. I'm going to go see a therapist. Things are going to work out. And so just tying it all together, so much about business is really just the marketing. It's about the perception, but also it impacts you too. You know, your feeling coming into it when you go do something will impact the results that you get. The second biggest lesson of 2024 for me, which was from becoming a father, is just the miracle and preciousness of life. And nothing will really express this point better than this story that I'm about to share. When my daughter was finally born and I heard her voice for the first time, it was such a surreal experience. It was honestly almost out of body. It was this image that up until that point, I'd only seen in an ultrasound and didn't appreciate that it's actually real. And then finally it like made a sound for the first time. It kind of like, in a sense, almost broke my mind, and was a honestly transcendent experience. On my drive home with my newborn baby and wife, I was in cloud nine. I was in heaven. And I remember even telling my wife, I think heaven might just be being in this state, repeating this moment of just driving home from the hospital with my baby. It was so surreal. And I was appreciating the miracle of life that every single one of us started as this baby, as literally something that was quite literally, in a sense, like it like nothing. It was inanimate. And then one day we're just here and we're people. And literally mind blown by the miracle of reality and how every single one of us is a miracle, that we exist and that we're alive, and we have parents that hopefully held us as precious, and now we're just adults. And it was so funny driving the car and seeing these truck drivers, honking, and a guy on his phone just spacing out. I remember just looking around thinking like, wow, we all walk around never really appreciating the miracle that we truly are. And it really just blew my mind. So yeah, that is lesson number 2. Every single one of us is a miracle. And I think even more important than that, it's so funny how we forget that.
What am I doing with my life? I'm alive! I'm alive! Free yourself!
And yeah, it's impossible to live in Western culture where you're expected to just like work 40-hour weeks and put so much time into your job, and then yet also appreciate that you're a miracle. I feel like in many ways, the culture we live in is not conducive for producing that kind of realization of the beauty and miracle of life. Lesson number 3, and this one has been a personal journey for me, was overcoming jealousy. How I ended up doing this, and what was my jealous struggle even. I typically, it's so funny, I do not really consider myself a jealous person. I've not struggled with jealousy for, like my upbringing. I typically was like not a very jealous person. But when I started my podcast and my YouTube channel, and more specifically my podcast really, I would get so jealous, extremely jealous. I would see other people's podcasts and they would grow much faster than mine. And other people, like they would post their episode, it would get 1,000 views in a day. I struggled to get like 100, 200 even. And it bothered me. It pained me because I thought in many ways my podcast is better than their podcast. And I didn't understand why theirs was doing better than mine. And it really made me feel like a failure, posting episode after episode and realizing that it's not going anywhere. It's not growing. The views were consistent and not bad. Honestly, compared to, I've seen other people's podcasts and they get like no views, and they're going years later with like 2 or 3 views an episode. And it's bizarre. Thank God my podcast wasn't that, but I wasn't seeing any growth. This was after a point where I even got really big guests for myself. Most notably, I got Dr. Justin Sledge, who's literally one of my favorite YouTubers, who talks about esoteric knowledge and breaks it down academically in such a easy to understand way. And he's like a gem on YouTube. And I was able to get him. He's huge. And then another podcast that I did with Trevor Aronson, he literally made some of my favorite pieces of content. He made Americanize This, which was just a mind-blowing podcast. And I was able to sit down with the two of them and have a conversation. Like, that blows my mind. And every single episode I did, honestly, is such an incredible thing that I was able to do because it wouldn't have happened otherwise had I not had the podcast. So by any measure, I should have been seeing my podcast as a success, but I wasn't. And it was eating at me. And it literally made me not want to produce any content. And honestly, it's a huge stumbling block. That and not having a consistent schedule is 2 of my biggest stumbling blocks for creating content. But I was so jealous. I was so jealous and it literally would eat at me. And then finally, I got together with a friend content creator of mine named Avner Fuzailov. We just recently started this where we're having a meeting every week and discussing our content goals and creating content weekly and consistently, making a schedule and stuff like that. And that's honestly directly responsible for why I'm making this video right now. But one of the things that I decided to do was I was going to make one reel and short for YouTube every single day for the year. Hopefully I'm going to stick to that. So far I've been sticking to it and it's been going on for a few weeks. So that's really exciting. But what I learned as I was doing that, and I would obsess over the stats. One of the things that I realized is like, what am I doing this for? Like, why am I making this content? And what I just realized was like, I'm doing this because this is something that I love to do. And through that realization, I realized I was like, oh man, I was pushing content for the sake of pushing content. That's not what I should be doing. I should be making the content that I love and putting it out. And who cares if it gets the views?
What?
Now, obviously, I know that if my editing were improved and my camera quality were improved and all that stuff, like that would help. But ultimately, what I'm still learning at this stage is to create the content that I love as coherently as possible. And so the only way that I was able to overcome that jealousy, because the jealousy would actually stop me from creating, the only way that I was able to break through that and finally come to that realization was almost hitting a rock bottom. It was through making those reels every day, which I didn't want to do because I would get hurt that people weren't watching them or engaging with them. But through making them, I eventually came to that realization of pushing through that, like, hey, what am I doing this for? I'm doing this because I want to create content that I love. I want to share a message that people find valuable and meaningful and improve their lives, to use the social media landscape as something to perpetuate wisdom, positivity, connection, right? Like, that is what I'm doing it for.
Let's all start clapping.
And so with that in mind, I'm hoping to have that influence the type of content that I make this year and my podcasts, as well as my reels. When I make a reel, I'm always trying to come up with an interesting question that can spark conversation for people. Anyways, guys, that wraps up this video. The 3 most valuable lessons that I learned in 2024 and how it's changed my life, and I hope that it could change your life coming 2025. To recap, everything is marketing. Another way of putting that is honestly just like perception is more important than the reality. Number 2, you are a miracle. Life is a miracle. And it's just freaking hilarious that we walk around never really appreciating it. It's just kind of funny, but it's true. And then number 3, jealousy is a real struggle. It's very easy to look at other people and think like you want what they have, but don't let that stop you. Keep pushing forward through the jealousy, and hopefully eventually you will break through. Guys, go get it. Take those lessons and grow. Anyways, guys, take care.